I've gotten quite a few comments asking about my disease, and although I've partly discussed it in other videos, I haven't yet talked about it in depth. And because this was, and still is, a major part of my life, it only seems logical to make a video about it. So here we are. Today I'll be telling you about my time in the hospital. This story starts when I was 7, and my disease had just barely begun. At first, the only showing symptoms were headaches, nausea, and drowsiness. This could mean diagnoses ranging from food poisoning to a brain tumor. And in most cases, these symptoms will go away on their own. But mine didn't. In fact, they were progressively getting worse. Until one day, when my headaches got so severe, I was vomiting into a bucket in between screams. At this point, my dad rushed me to the ER. There, we were offered a CT scan, because my condition wasn't yet bad enough to suggest me needing anything more. But my dad refused to accept, insisting I be given an MRI. And after a long while of not taking no for an answer, we ended up getting in. And what that MRI showed made it clear I wasn't fit to leave the hospital. That MRI showed that my brain was swelling. Fast forward a week, and dozens of tests had been done. Many diagnoses had been suggested, including MS, vasculitis, and lupus. One student doctor even suggested I was faking it, because obviously my second grade self had the brains to fake MRI images. Pun intended. But time after time, these diagnoses were disproven, leaving us back at square one. By this point, my disease was at its worst. I couldn't walk and was in a wheelchair. I was puking all day and all night. I couldn't even remember who my own parents were. And that's when a brain biopsy was brought to the table. Now this would mean drilling a hole into my skull and picking out a piece of my brain. Odds are that if this procedure had been done, I wouldn't have the ability to walk today. Luckily, this is when my parents decided to take me to a specialist in another hospital. But my condition was so bad that the doctors believed I wouldn't survive the transfer. Despite the warning, we transferred to Sick Kids Hospital, and that's the reason I'm better today. When we arrived at the hospital, I remember being surprised when a team of doctors came to my room, each specializing in different areas. As it turns out, the hospital I was at, Sick Kids, had an entire department dedicated to neuroinflammatory disorders, run by a brilliant doctor/researcher, and I've been under her care ever since. She was able to diagnose me quickly after seeing the MRI images and blood work. That's when we found out that I have MOG antibody disease, an incredibly rare disease that most people and doctors have never heard of. A disease that caused my immune system to generate anti-MOG, antibodies that would attack my brain if given an immune response, for example, catching the flu. The treatment I went on was high-dose IV steroids, followed by prednisone, which tasted like blended pennies with salt. And of course, I had to not get sick. And although that sounds next to impossible for a second grader, it actually worked for quite a long time. Sure, I got some minor colds, but nothing that caused serious immune response. Until 3 years later, we were visiting family in the US for Christmas, and my little cousin had the sniffles. On Christmas morning, out of nowhere, my symptoms hit at full force. We had to pack up and drive the full day back to Canada. But this time, we were prepared. Unlike the last attack, we knew my diagnosis. And by the time we walked in, an MRI was lined up to confirm that my brain was swelling. IV steroids were used to stop the attack, and afterwards, we decided to try a new treatment, called rituximab. This was given to me through 8-hour infusions. Basically, what rituximab does is stop the creation of B cells in my immune system from being created. So although I wouldn't have an attack when I got sick, my body would have less defenses to fight against the sickness. And I had infusions every 6 months for years, but recently, we decided to stop. That was just a few months before COVID began. Since then, I haven't suffered from any attacks. Although it was a tough decision to take me off infusions, the medication could have negative side effects on its own, which weren't worth having later on. And yes, there's a fair chance I'll have another attack one day, and if that happens, I'll have to continue with rituximab. But there's also a possible cure. Because of COVID, the advancement of mRNA technology has rapidly sped up, and studies have shown promising cures for my disease using mRNA. If this happens, well, That solves a lot of problems. Speaking of treatments and cures, there's some amazing research being done by Dr. Levy at the NNMO Clinic and Research Laboratory in Boston, Massachusetts. And if you wanted to learn more about this, or donate directly to the research, go visit mogresearch.org, link down in the description. Anyways, thank you all so much for watching till the end of the video. This one took more than one all-nighter to finish, and that's probably why my voice sounds so crackly recording this. But if you made it this far, be sure that you subscribe and like, and stay tuned for more content coming soon.